I tell a story, and some of you may have heard me tell this, but let me tell it again. Boston, about 4 years ago, major teaching hospital. I can't tell you the name. You can probably figure it out. Boston, where they invented medicine, right? That's what all my friends in Boston tell me. At any rate, there's a very good surgeon coming in today for 4 procedures. He's got 4 cases. The second case has been driving him nuts for about the last 3 months. As a matter of fact, he is really concerned that he's gone over his own professional line and permitted this particular woman, his patient, to wait too long for what he has recommended now strongly as a double radical mastectomy because of her cancerous condition. This was a woman who's 31 years old, former model, a local model in the area. Her self-image has been so destroyed by this diagnosis and recommendation that she and her family have pushed back massively. Anything else we can do. It has sent him into the literature, and he said, you know, I could not disconnect myself from this case. I didn't know these people otherwise before she became my patient, but he said it was like falling into the black hole of pain every time the event horizon was crossed, every time I sat down in my office. I was spending inordinate amounts of time researching, is there anything else we can do? And finally, I'm alarmed that we've waited too long, and now I finally got her scheduled. Everybody's in agreement, although it's a veil of tears, and this is the morning for the surgery. The first case, the third and the fourth, unrelated, they're pretty routine. But he comes in before the first case, finds her and the family and the husband all in the waiting area, and as he's talking to them, he says, once again, I get sucked in across that event horizon into this black hole of pain, and I can't get out. My first case runs an hour long because I'm so torn. I've got part of my mind, even while I'm operating on this other individual, part of my mind is still saying, is there anything else that I might have missed? Something else that we might do? He says, finally I come into the OR, I'm scrubbed up, and I'll just tell it third person rather than first. He walks into the OR, the scrub nurse looks up and says, Doc, finally, we're about an hour late. She says, I'm sure you know, but are you ready for the timeout? And he says, I don't have time. He says, go ahead and do it for me, if you will. But she doesn't say anything. She is a really good participant in the teamwork. She knows this doctor, and she knows, of course, that you can't do a timeout effectively unless the attending is really the not just participating, but actually the convening authority, if you will, and participates fully. She knows this, but she also knows they're an hour late, and he seems distracted, and he's busy looking at his setup, and so she does her best. Totally ineffective because part of it is introducing the room. You can't do that if the room isn't going to be participating, if certainly the attending is sitting back. Now, this isn't one of the guys who has said, don't tell me how to practice medicine. This fellow's been doing timeouts. But you see, we made a huge mistake with him, just like we have pretty much throughout clinical medicine in the United States, because no one ever pushed beyond the opening of his OR door, in effect, and saying, you know what? We got a great tactic for you here, Doc. Just put this into place. It's going to solve all your problems. Nobody explained the philosophy. Nobody explained the strategy. Nobody explained what Atul explained in his book. And so this fellow was left with, okay, fine, they want me to do this, I'll do this, until you scratch him too deeply because something doesn't go as was intended. And then what's the first thing that's going to go away? Those things that he doesn't have any basis for belief in, including the timeout. And that's why he says, please do it for me. It's not a matter of arrogance. It's not a tomcat saying, don't tell me how to practice medicine, although we've got plenty of those, as you well know. It's a matter of we never convinced him. And now he's doing his mental setup, and he realizes that and I said scrub nurse, it was a circulator. Circulator is over at the end of the table, and she is loudly flipping through papers on a clipboard, and he looks over and says, what's the matter? And she says, wait a second. He says, I don't have a second. What's the matter? She says, Doc, give me a minute. Something's wrong. I'm trying to figure it out, okay? And now he gets into the command mode because he's really concerned about the time, too. He's got 2 more cases. He says, I don't have a minute. What's the problem? And now it's 2 alphas going at each other, right? I need a minute. You're not going to have a minute. And finally, he goes into complete command mode. We've all done this as parents, if not anything else. You know, the finger comes up, the voice goes deep. You're going to do such and such. And he says, you've got 30 seconds to tell me what's wrong or we're going ahead. He looks at the clock, makes note of the second hand, finishes his mental setup. He's got all his instruments around pretty much the way he wanted them on his preference card. By the way, I'm at war with preference cards. We need to standardize. There's no excuse for most of the lack of standardization we have. He looks up again, 30 seconds have passed, and he says, okay, picks up the scalpel, time of incision, and he starts down toward the patient. There's some noise to his right. It's kind of a kerfluffle of noise. He doesn't pay much attention to it. He doesn't even look over. He figures somebody dropped something. But as he is coming down with the blade, a hand suddenly slaps itself right in the fenestrated area, right before him, almost cuts it. And he pulls back, suddenly looks up, and it's the circulator who has literally lunged her body across the patient and slapped her hand in the expected incision part, right there in the fenestrated area. And he jumps back and says, what in the world are you doing? A little rougher language than that, but you get the idea. And she says, Doc, you're going to cut through me if you're going to get to this patient before I tell you I figured this out. Now, he does not take this well. The scalpel goes airborne. Actually, it's not airborne, it's ballistic. And he bursts out of the OR, and he's offended too. I mean, I try to explain to people who don't know anything about this arena that it isn't just a matter of ego. This is not the way things are supposed to happen. He's down the corridor, kind of half sulking and half trying to figure out what to do. And he's still torn up, of course, about this procedure to begin with. The circulator finds him. He looks up. She's standing there with a piece of paper in his face. He looks at the piece of paper, and all the blood drains out of his face as it has out of hers. Because what he was about to do was remove the breasts of a 34-year-old woman in for a hernia repair, who had the misfortune to have the same last name as his patient. They've been wheeled into different ORs. No, it can't happen, but it does. And the other procedure wasn't scheduled to start for about 20 minutes. You can do an awful lot of damage with a tin blade in that period of time, as we all know. Now, what do we do in a situation like this? We turn to the nurse and say, we want to congratulate you. We want to put you up on a pedestal. We want to appreciate you for what you did. Yeah, darn right we do. We want to make sure that everybody knows that the wages for that kind of action are respect and appreciation. But what if she was wrong? What if she'd done that and she was wrong? What do we tend to do? We tend to say, well, it was a good idea, but you shouldn't have done it because you were wrong, etc. We have to hold people up to a higher standard of conduct than just looking at the outcomes. When somebody speaks up, even if they're wrong, that's what we want them to do. That's what we need them to do. But what do we do with the doc? Do we say, you unrepentant and unrecalcitrant poor practitioner here, you almost maimed this woman because you didn't do a timeout? Well, essentially, the last part is correct. That if he'd done the timeout appropriately, this would not have been possible, because that's why she was searching on the papers. But what we do, first of all, this guy became an immediate convert. He's even teaching that stuff these days. But the fact is, what we needed to do was what he helped with later, to say, I am an example. I want to tell you guys about what I almost did, what almost happened to me, how shattering an event that would have been. And of course, there was another 3 or 4 day delay to get the surgery done for this woman who really didn't need the mastectomy. We take a look at something like this, and it should be a call to arms, and too often it's not. Too often we don't even know about these things because we don't have a method of talking about them, because we've got such fear and such shame, because we haven't created the reporting type systems that we need, because we have a system legally in the United States which seals records. And that's got to be stopped. And that's a standalone motherhood, God, and apple pie thing I think we can get through Congress pretty easily, to simply say that you can't seal a record unless we have all the clinically useful information out of that record in a medical malpractice case. Because as most of you know, it's not medical malpractice, really it's medical mispractice.